All right, so we're going to be looking at the United States entering into World War II. Even though the United States officially, well, let me backtrack that. World War II officially begins in September of 1939. If you know U.S. history or sort of big events, we know that the United States doesn't officially get involved into World War II until Pearl Harbor on December 7th of 1941. So about 2 years after it officially started. But before we even get to the Pearl Harbor incident, we kind of have to go back and look at what was happening years prior. And this question you do not need to write down, but normally I would ask you guys this in class. Do you believe the US should become involved in the wars of other nations even when it is not under attack? And I always get very different answers. Some people are like, yes, we should. We should be fighting for humanity and civil rights for others. People bring up incidents like the Holocaust. The U.S. maybe should have gotten involved earlier to prevent the Holocaust from happening or at least lessen the damage of it, because that's always a question that comes up. Was the U.S. aware of what was happening? The answer is yes. All the countries knew what was going on with these concentration camps, but for them, in order to even end what was going on there, it was more important to end the war first. We've also seen genocides in other countries, including a country like Rwanda, which in the 1990s saw about 1 million people killed within 3 months of a civil war. A lot of people said Bill Clinton should have gotten involved and didn't, and criticized him for doing so. But then you have some people who were like, hey, what's going on in other countries, that's their business. The U.S. shouldn't be getting involved at all. You can't force people to want to change or believe in what it is that you want to believe in. And there's definitely some truth to sort of all of those sides. But again, when looking at World War II, and I talked about the other day with Dunkirk, is that even though the U.S. officially gets involved with Pearl Harbor, they probably would have gotten involved sooner if things had taken a turn for the worse, especially for the British. So what exactly is the United States' perspective on World War II? Well, just like in World War I, the U.S. believes in isolationism, and it's the belief that the U.S. should avoid international commitments that might drag them into war. Keep in mind that during the 1930s, the United States is also going through their own Great Depression. We have unemployment at 25%, people can't feed themselves, they don't have roofs over my head. It's really going to be hard for the U.S. to justify going into a war abroad when at home, your own people can't even eat or take care of themselves. So for the US, they were like, we're going to butt out. We've got our own problems at home. We've got our own issues going on in America. We have got to deal with those first before we even take a look at what's going on in places like Europe. But even though the U.S. wasn't involved in World War II, they were keeping an eye on things, and they definitely feared war over German and Italian aggression. They saw that Mussolini was on the rise, Americans saw that Hitler was on the rise, and sort of very quickly realized this could take a turn for the worse. And we see those moments play out in big sort of cultural moments. One that really comes to mind is Joe Louis, who was a black American boxer and had grown up in the Jim Crow South, in which segregation was really present. Well, in 1936 and 1938, he's going to fight this German boxer named Max Schmeling. And people are rooting for Joe Louis to beat the crap out of this guy. Why? Because America was on the line. For them, it wasn't just, hey, here's Joe Louis fighting Max Schmeling. It was, here was America fighting Germany. And it was a big deal if, America would win a boxing match or win in the Olympics in 1936, which took place in Berlin. So even though, again, the U.S. is butting out of war, they're trying to find other ways to have the upper hand on both Germany as well as Italy. And in 1935, the Neutrality Act is going to be passed. It's going to be illegal for Americans to sell arms to any country at war. So unlike in World War I, where the U.S. made it so you could sell to countries at war as long as you sold to both sides, in 1935, they're going to make it illegal for Americans to sell arms to any country at war, whether it was the British and the French and the Allied powers, or the Germans and the Italians and the Axis powers. Granted, no one had gone to war yet in 1935, but again, the U.S. is watching with great interest. They see what's happening, and they know that war is definitely a great possibility. But of course, this is the United States, and even though the United States is watching with great interest, they're claiming ideas of neutrality and isolationism. Just like in World War I, it's not going to last very long. And so in 1937, another Neutrality Act is going to be passed, and it's still going to be illegal to sell arms, but a country could buy supplies from the U.S. if they pick them up themselves with what they call pay with cash, no loans, and this became known as a cash and carry policy. So this was the deal that the U.S. made to other nations. We're not going to sell you weapons. We're not going to do that. But again, in order to fight a war, you need other things. You need food, you need medicine, you need clothing, you need helmets, just sort of like basic necessities. So the US told European countries this: if you want these supplies, we'll sell them to them, but you got to come pick them up. So get on your boat and travel overseas, across the Atlantic Ocean or across the pond as it's more commonly known. Pick up these weapons yourself, pay cash for them, and then travel back. And the reason that they wanted to avoid that loan policy was because they had loaned out money during World War I. Come the 1920s, all of these countries go through their own Great Depression. They can't pay back that money. And again, this is the 1930s. The U.S. is going through their own Great Depression. So they're like, listen, we can't afford to loan you money because we don't have money to loan you. So if you want to pay cash, come pick the stuff up. And if not, we're cool. And then in 1839, another Neutrality Act is going to be passed, and it's going to say that warring nations could buy weapons from the U.S., again with that cash and carry policy. Why does that change in 1939? In 1935, the U.S. said, we're not selling to nations at war, but then in 1939, they're saying, we are selling to nations at war. Well, because in 1939, World War II officially kicks off. And again, the U.S. kind of sees this as an opportunity to make money. War is very brutal. It is very dangerous. It causes a lot of pain and heartache. It also costs a lot of money. And war does present an opportunity for people to make money. So the U.S. is like, hey, we're going to go ahead and take this opportunity, and we are going to start selling weapons to people. But again, they have to come to the U.S. to pick those weapons up. And again, even though the United States is officially declaring themselves neutral and isolationist, when they join the war and even before the war, they're definitely going to, ally with the Allied powers, of the French and of the British. Again, they're not fans of Hitler. They're not fans of Mussolini. They're not even really big fans of Stalin, who at that point had joined forces with Germany in that Nazi-Soviet non-aggression pact. So the U.S. is definitely kind of keeping an eye on things, but they realize that they've got a stake in the game. Right? Even though they're not officially involved in the war, they do care about the outcome. And they're like, listen, if someone's going to win, we want the Allied powers to win. Winston Churchill, who was the great leader of Great Britain, he's also the prime minister at the time, essentially equivalent to the president, which is what FDR was. He's kind of telling FDR, listen, I need destroyers. And if you look at the picture there of destroyers, they are absolutely massive ships that pretty much any naval military in the world has today. They're huge ships. Basically, they're meant to sort of protect littler boats. They also help in sort of like taking a beating from either bombings, protecting submarines, aircrafts, just kind of transporting goods and services, basically really large weapons. So FDR is going to end up giving destroyers to the British military in bases in Newfoundland, Bermuda, as well as the Caribbean. And the reason that he was able to do this is because there was a little bit of a loophole. The Neutrality Act didn't come into play because it did not involve the actual sale. So rather than invoking that cash and carry policy where it was like, hey, we're going to sell you these destroyers and you got to come pick them up, FDR told Churchill, we can just give them to you and it doesn't violate the law. So he found a little loophole in him. So again, even though the U.S. is claiming to be neutral, they're claiming to be isolationist, they're watching, they're paying attention, and they realize that if somebody's going to win, we definitely want it to be the British and the French and the rest of the Allied powers. And then FDR is going to be elected to a third presidential term. I had brought this up last semester, but FDR is the only president to ever serve more than 2 terms. He's actually going to be elected to a total of 4, but he'll die very quickly into his 4th term, about 3 months into it. This was the first time that anyone had been elected to a 3rd term. Today, that will not and cannot happen. After FDR passes away in the 1950s, the United States passes the 22nd Amendment, which limits the president to 2 presidential terms. So think about 22, 2 twos, 2 terms. And you can see that even when this next election takes place in 1940, FDR is still incredibly popular. If you look at that map, all those blue represent Democratic states in the Electoral College, and the red represents the Republicans. So he had kind of lost a little bit of the Electoral College vote, but not much. People still really believed in FDR because they saw that throughout the Great Depression that he was trying to make things better for America. And with war looking like it may or may not happen, Americans tend to like to stick with the same president, especially if a war is going on, because there's this kind of a trust factor like, hey, you've been there from the beginning, so we want to make sure that you can see it out. So FDR in 1940 will be elected yet again, and then in 1944 he'll officially be elected for a fourth term. But again, that won't happen today, so FDR will be the only president to ever hold the title of serving more than 2 terms. And on January 6th of 1941, FDR is going to give his State of the Union address. Pretty much every president every year gives usually a couple State of the Union addresses. It's part of the Constitution in which they have to kind of like address the American people of, hey, here's what's going on. This is like what we're looking to do. This is what we're proud of. And as a result, it becomes known as the State of the Union. January is typically when the State of the Union addresses take place, but some presidents do choose to have more than one State of the Union address per year. But if not, it typically always takes place in January. And I want you to keep in mind on that date, January 6th of 1941. So this is after FDR has been elected to a third term. It's also about 11 months before Pearl Harbor. This is also after Dunkirk. So again, U.S. paying attention to what's going on in Europe. They're well aware of what's at stake. And in this speech that becomes known as the For Freedom speech, FDR basically tells the U.S. this: we're going to have to help the British. The British are the last standing democracy that's left in the war. Mussolini and Hitler, those are not democratic governments. Those are dictatorships in which one man rules all. We don't fight for that. Right? We have free and fair elections in the United States where we get to have a say in what it is we want to happen to our country. And FDR is kind of preparing the people for war here. He's like, listen, if the British fall, we're going to have to go in. We can't let dictatorships take over the world. We have to fight for democracy, for government for the people, by the people. That's what's really key. And he's talking about this not just for America, but for the sake of the world. If dictatorships and fascism and Nazism all of a sudden take over planet Earth, it's not going to be good for the people. And so, again, he's really just preparing Americans for, we've got to fight for democracy, and there's more at stake here with World War II and Hitler and Mussolini on the rise than as we just don't want to get involved. And he said that there are 4 main freedoms in which the U.S. and the British should stand for. He talks about freedom of speech. So it's the freedom to say what it is that you want to say. So if I want to, stand on a corner and be like, let's go Biden, I could. Or if I wanted to stand on a corner and be like, MAGA 2020 or 2024, as Trump's likely going to run again, I have the right to do that. That is my freedom of speech. FDR also talks about the freedom of worship. So it's the right to believe in whatever it is that you want to believe. So if I want to be a Christian or a Catholic or a Muslim or Jewish or Buddhist or atheist or agnostic or a Wiccan or whatever, I should have the right to believe in what it is that I want to believe in and really worship. He also talks about this freedom from want, which I'm going to touch on base in a little bit with this Norman Rockwell picture. But freedom from want is this idea that you shouldn't have to want anything. Basic necessities like having, food on the table or roof over your head. You shouldn't have to want those things. Those should be things that you already have. And then freedom from fear, right? You shouldn't have to be fearful of going to sleep at night or fearful of going to school or fearful of getting in a car. You should be able to live your life how it is that you want to live it without, living in fear that bad things might happen to you or even your country. And this became a very successful speech, so much so that Norman Rockwell, a very famous American artist, he's going to develop these 4 paintings that are going to represent the 4 freedoms that were talked about in the State of the Union address. You can see a little overview of them here, but we'll go in depth over each of them. This first one represents freedom of speech. And if you look at this painting here, the guy that's standing up, right, he's not wearing a suit. He's what we would call like a blue-collar worker, right? You can kind of see that he's wearing like a leather jacket. He's probably someone who just got off work and then, went to maybe like a town hall meeting or something like that. And he stands up because he wants to speak and give his opinion. This was very intentional by Norman Rockwell. It was this idea that you can be a normal citizen to stand up and have your voice heard and have people pay attention to you. You don't have to be the president and wear a fancy suit or have a bunch of money in order to exercise freedom of speech. That should exist for everybody, even the average American like this gentleman here. In this next painting, this represents freedom of worship. You can see here the woman has a rosary in her hands that represents Catholicism. You see a couple of different people praying that would typically represent some form of Christianity. It doesn't have to be Christianity. It could kind of be any religion in which people pray. But again, you have all these people together. You can say that they're different races, obviously different backgrounds, but everybody should have the right to freedom of worship. So again, you could believe in something, you can believe in nothing, you can believe in there might be something out there, I just don't know what it is. But at the end of the day, that is your right. And this painting here represents freedom from want. Kids always notice the guy on the left who looks very creepy. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Right here with the little circular face, like he's got a creepy smile. I'm like, yeah, he definitely kind of does. But if you notice here in this freedom from want painting, it's showing none other than Thanksgiving dinner. Thanksgiving is typically where we all come together, we have dinner with family, and we celebrate the things that we are thankful for. Again, whether it's friends or family, food on the table, a roof over your head. And again, when FDR gives this speech, we're still in the middle of the Great Depression. So this idea of you shouldn't have to want things. Your necessities in life, like food on the table and a roof over your head and being with your family, those should be automatic haves. They shouldn't be wants. And then this last one here is freedom from fear. You can see the family is tucking in their kids. And I can't zoom in on the newspaper here, but it does talk about bombings. So even though, awful things are happening throughout the world, they still want to be able to tuck their kids in at night and then be able to sleep safely and sounding. So you shouldn't be fearful of what's going on. You shouldn't be fearful of being bombed or, being taken out of your home. You should still be able to exercise, again, your freedom from fear and being able to sleep at night in peace in your own home.